Hello, welcome to another video of Colorful Code. I'm Eric. Okay, today I'm going to introduce how to safely use the GraphQL data. And no matter what kind of engineer or developer you are, we will need to have we will need to fetch the data from the endpoint, and the most of the time we are going to fetch the data from GraphQL because it's kind of the most popular data framework. So, for example, that we are going to uh, fetch this GraphQL endpoint called service.xyz, which is that I created before. And this in by using this GraphQL endpoint, we will be able to see the information of the DeFi and Solana DeFi protocol. For example, if we want to see the token info of this certain token info, including price, protocol, chain ID, and then the symbol, and then we can just pass the symbol into the get token info, right? So for example, if we want to see that USDC, we will see ETH, and then we will immediately see that we have those information here. So that is very convenient way to fetch the data, and it's a scalable way, right? If we want to have this part of the data, and then we can just query this part of data, and if you want to go back to the original one, we want to have the more data, and then we can fetch more data. So this is the advantage of using the GraphQL. But if we use it in code, we will not be able to see that or see the type of that GraphQL. So let's get into the code section. Let me introduce how to fetch the data from the GraphQL. So we can open the CS code window, and then inside our home directory, and then we can create a new directory probably name it as GQL the code gen demo, and then we cd into the GQL code gen demo. Then we can init the yarn, and then we get into this directory by VS Code, okay? And we will see the basic setting of the package.json. We will need some package to use the graph to fetch the GraphQL. The first one will be the GraphQL, right? Very obvious. And then we will use the GraphQL request to fetch the data. Okay, and then now we will soon see the new dependency added on the package.json. Now we can create our file directory. We create a source folder, and then we create another the index.ts folder because we are using TypeScript. And then afterward, we are going to import the request and GQL from the GraphQL request. Okay, and what we are gonna do is to create a query. Firstly, we create the endpoint, right? Which endpoint that we are going to use to fetch the data. So we are going to fetch the data of this endpoint, right? Until the graph here. Then pass in here, and then we can create our GraphQL schema, which is the one of all things here. We pass it in, and then we use the request function, and then to fetch this data, we need to define. We might not need this. Okay. To use this one, we can get we know that we can get the certain symbol of token and then check out all the data, and it will return that it will return all the data from the GraphQL database by passing the import into this GraphQL argument, right? So we are defining this. So we are going to define this symbol here as it, okay, and then we are going to use the request method passing into the endpoint, and then the query here, and then the variable, and then the most important part is that we get the data, and then we just print out the data. Okay, that's it, and then we can use the yarn. We create a script before the dependency section. We create this script, and it will call start. It will be called start, and then we are going to use the TS node, right, to execute the index here. That's it. And we don't need this command. Okay, now we can run yarn start to see the result, and we can see that the return object includes a token infos with a info array. Okay, so this is the information we want. We have all the information about Ethereum. Okay, now that is pretty much, and then it's very good, and then we get the data, and then we can use the data. But the point is here, the problem is here. We have the data, but we don't know what is inside here. You say that we can just check out here, and then we print out. We know that we exactly know that what is it, but it you never know that the query change or when it changes. When it changes, we are not able to know it on time, and then it will break our application. Especially when if we do it like this, we know that we have a token info inside the return object, right? So we can use the JavaScript token the function, the structure function, and then print out the token infos here. We know it is going to work, but TypeScript doesn't. TypeScript says it is not assignable because the unknown of the data is not assignable to the token infos. So let's prove it. We can just ignore the arrow and then we do it again. And you see that we see the information exactly what we want, the array of the token info object. So that is the problem. We want to solve this problem by using the code gen GraphQL code gen. So okay, now let's get into the code gen section. What is the code gen? You can refer to my documentation here. We're going to use the code gen. You can see we can just get into there, GraphQL code gen, and then you will see the home of the code generator, and then you will be able to see what it can help. It will help us to generate the type query, mutation, and subscription. And then if you are the backend, to design the GraphQL server, you will be able to get the typed GraphQL resolver, and then we will able to see the fully typed Node.js SDKs, including the whole Apollo, Android, and then some other like React and Vue, all other framework. Okay, now it is about the overview. So now how we can get this type set for our application is that we just simply install things. Now we need to yarn install. I also create another document to help us to quickly get into it. So we are going to use exactly this plugin of the TypeGen, the code generator. And then this code generator will help us to create a get SDK method, and then we can use the get SDK method to get our return value. So it might be not so clear for you now, but when you get into the code section, it will be clear. So we need to have some dependency, to be precise, 4 dependencies. So we can just install those dependencies. Oops. You copy that and then click enter, and then you see that it might take a little bit more time. But we, in this meantime, we just go back to the documentation and then see what we should do for next. We will need to create the config for this to let the code generator know what to refer, what kind of document it will need to refer. You might be wondering what is the document and then why we need this. You will see that in a second. And then we will need to let the codegen knows that which directory or which file that we will need to generate. Okay, so we copy this and then pass it inside. Okay, it's already installed. And then we create the new file called codegen.ts and then pass it in. And then go to the next session. Now everything is almost done. It's very simple. And now we get into here. So the documentation here is actually that we defined here, right? The reason why the codegen knows that the certain return values type is that we define that here, right? So we also need to provide this to the codegen and then let the codegen knows that which file or which folder that that the definition is or definition files are. In this case, we will put it like all the TypeScript. We will indicate it to all the TypeScript file inside the source folder. So we might not need it be the index file. We just create another one. We call that the GQL, and then we create another one called the subfolder called GraphQL query. And then inside the query, we will create one called token info.ts, and then simply we copy this thing in. Oops. We copy this in, and we don't need this. That's it. We don't need to use it, but we just need to let the codegen knows that we need this. It doesn't need to be called query. We call it exactly the name here. That's great. Now it's done. And we can do the same thing. We need to let the codegen to generate the type files. We need to create a new script here. It's here. We call that codegen, and then it will use the code GraphQL codegen, and then we define the config, which is the codegen.ts, right? That we just made, and then simply we run the yarn create, not create yarn codegen, and you'll see that it generates a generated TS, which is the inside the directory we defined inside the codegen TS here. Okay, and then get into the codegen TS, get onto the very bottom, and we see that very important part, which is this part, get SDK method, which return this get token infos here, and it will return a lot of values. Maybe it will return the get token info query. And then what is the type of get token info query is here? Timestamp, price, protocol, and blah blah blah, more than 5. But so now you get the point, right? If we define that only URL and then try to call gen again, and you will soon see, oops, get token info. Well, let's delete this first. Not all operators have unique name. Get token infos. I think it says that we have 2, so the reason is that we also defined it here, so it makes the error because it has the conflict name. So let's create it again. Okay, now you will see that it's generated, and then get back to the very button, and you see that here, get token info query. Now it has only local URL. So that means it refers to this type, and it refers to this query, and then generate the type. So now you get the idea. How to use that? Now we get it. Now you need to use the get SDK to generate SDK, and then use the get token info, and then pass in the variable value. And what is the variables type? Now we know that we need to pass in the symbol, and then as a variable. Cool, right? So now we know that. Okay, let's get into how the usage part. We don't need this anymore, and we need to. Now we don't need because of this. The only thing we need is this, the GraphQL client, and then we can. Okay, so we after importing the GraphQL client, and then we can use we can create a client by using this class, and then passing the endpoint into the class, and then we can create the SDK by using the get SDK that we just created in that we have just seen in that type in that generated file with the argument of the client. Now we can make use of the SDK, and then immediately we can see there is a get token info inside here, and then where is it? It is inside here, as we just see it before, and we pass in the variable. Now it knows that we need to pass in the variable with the symbol of a string, exactly as the variable that we defined here, right? We can also define the types here. It is the get token info query variable, right? And if we define it here, and if we now it is very safe to do things, right? If we want to pass in another information here, TypeScript will tell us that this type can only allow you to have simple fields instead of others, and we can pass in the variables and print out the information. So that is exactly what we want to do right now compared to the information before. Now we don't need it. Instead of have unknown structure, now we have exactly all the type inside here. Awesome. Now let's try to run yarn start to see if we can get exact result as before. Oops, and it says the error here. It says that we don't have these things. So what is the reason? The reason is that, let's get back to the documentation. And the reason is that the GraphQL package has been updated to the version 1. Greater than 1.1.5.1.1, which has removed this file inside the GraphQL. So when we use that codegen, it will import this file from the GraphQL request, and then it fails. So the problem to solve that is very easy. We just downgrade the GraphQL request to the 5.1.0, and by this, now we have the GraphQL in the 6, right? So we need to have 5.1.0 here, and we install it again. Before that, we need to delete the log file, and then yarn install. Okay, and then it will take a little bit time because it will check all the dependency tree and then install the needed module again. Okay, now after installation, we will be able to run it again. It actually takes a little bit more time. Okay, now it's going to be soon done, and then we can run it again. And now we'll be able to see the local URI only, because remember that we need to run the codegen again to generate the new type. Nice, and then we'll start again. As you can see that is exactly the same result as we have done before. So now we have a fully typeset GraphQL return value with our application. I hope it can help you, and if it is helpful for you, please like the video and then subscribe to the channel. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video.